The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri, and in this edition we're going to be doing an election wrap-up. We realize the election was a week and 2 days ago as we tape this, but this is our first taping date since the election. So here to talk about the election and their viewpoints on it, Dr. Jim Simmons on the far left there. He is UW.
Far left.
No political puns intended there. Jim is the political science chair at UW-Oshkosh, and to my immediate left is Miles Maguire. Dr. Maguire is UW journalism professor. He's also the editor of Oshblog and Oshkosh Community News Network. So thanks very much to both of you for taking time out of your Thursday nights to be here. Well, the election is behind us, and just as a general statement, are you pleased?
That is behind us, yes.
Were you surprised by anything?
Actually, quite a few things. Not so much about the outcome as by the size of the vote and the number of seats that turned over.
There was a huge voter turnout.
Well, over 40%. I mean, in most industrial democracies, 40% was seen as a disaster. But for
compared
us,
to here,
yeah,
I mean, you know. Okay, Miles, what about you?
Yeah, I was surprised, I guess, at sort of the differential, I guess, in the 54th district race. I think most people thought that was going to be close, and it wasn't.
Well, why don't we start talking about the 54th district race? That was Gordon Hentz versus Julie Pung-Leschke. Gordon, the Democrat, first-time Democrats won that seat in over 20 years.
1982.
1982 was the last time. It was an open seat. Greg Underheim had held that seat for about 19 years. What do you attribute Gordon's victory to?
Well, there's no one thing. The district has been trending Democratic for some time.
Yeah.
And when you ran the last time and Gordon got 40% of the vote, and then another candidate 4, and Greg finished under
50%.
Yeah, under 50%. Well, even under 60% means you become a target. So that you knew that interest group money was going to pour in, that independent spending was going to become a major feature of this campaign. And
do you think the Pung-Leschke campaign got hijacked by outside interests? It seemed like a ton of advertising for her was being done by Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, some outfit called All Children Matter from Michigan.
And the realtors played a huge role in it,
The realtors, did she kind of lose control of her own campaign, do you think?
I think to an extent.
Yeah.
She might have done more to, show some independence from those groups, or condemn them for she did a little bit of that, but not as much as she might have.
Well, I think that's what really surprised me is, when she was on the show, I don't recall if she said it on air, but I know off camera she said that she didn't like some of the negativity that she was already seeing from Gordon Hentz's campaign, and she said that on your radio show too, and yet the campaign, I thought, became super ugly against Hentz,
Right.
and yet she wasn't doing it, but these other outside interest groups were, and she sat by and said nothing, even when her own treasurer quit because of some of the negativity. She still said nothing publicly. Jim, do you think that would have helped her if she had done that?
I think it probably would have helped her. I don't think that she would have won in the end. I think this was a Democratic year. She might have cut back the margin. I mean, after all, Gordon had been campaigning for 2 years. He was campaigning continuously from
nonstop.
Nonstop, and he worked extremely hard. I mean, she surprised me by how much effort she put into the campaign, but I think he would have won anyway, and the margin might have changed.
Miles, Gordon and his campaign were a little bit more web savvy than the Pung-Leschke campaign. Do you think that had any role in this?
It's hard to see that they did. I mean, I know they had little videos on YouTube, for example, and the thing is, though, you can go to YouTube and see how many times they've been downloaded, and they really weren't watched that much.
No, but how did Oshkosh Community News Network change in the coverage of the 54th this time compared to 2004?
Well, what we didn't do was the online blog debate. We got some feedback from members who participated in that it was a lot of work, and I wasn't sure that we were going to be able to pull it off this time. So we tried to do a program we called Conversations with the Candidates, where we tried to just kind of bring them together and have the two of them talk to each other rather than have moderators intervene and all that sort of thing. And I think it was interesting, but I don't know that it changed the outcome of the election one way or another.
Yeah, because it does seem statewide, Jim, a lot of candidates won who didn't have an active web presence, like the state treasurer, Dawn Marie Sass. I don't think she had...
No one knew she had an active campaign until she won.
Exactly. Exactly. She beat Jack Voigt, UW-Oshkosh graduate, who'd been the treasurer for 12 years. He didn't have the strongest record. I mean, hadn't he kind of messed up on the EdVest program? But still, she didn't really campaign that hard.
Truthfully, going into election night, I was expecting the Democrats would pick up a couple of seats in the state Senate and maybe 4 seats in the Assembly. And there were Republicans who lost who had no idea they had any serious opposition. I mean, the turnover. The Democrats won every seat that was closely contested. Without any question. I mean, it was, use the euphemism, running the table, filling an inside straight. They did it that night.
Was it? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just thought it was interesting that the whole strategy of sort of wedge issues was, sort of at play here in Wisconsin, where I think the Republicans wanted the marriage and the death penalty on the ballot as a way of sort of rallying their base and getting their base out there, and it didn't seem to fly.
So one theory I've heard, let me see if you agree with this, and this theory comes from Jim Sensenbrenner, one of the most conservative members of Congress. He's claiming that the marriage amendment ended up working negatively against the Republicans because he's saying what it did was bring out the Reagan conservative Democrats who went to the polls, they voted for the marriage amendment, and then they voted for all Democrats. That theory makes sense, doesn't it?
A lot of blue-collar voters, low income, somewhat less educated, were voting for the marriage amendment, for the death penalty, and Democratic.
Because if you look at the amount of votes that Mark Green got, and you look at the amount of votes that the referendum got, there's a disparity.
Sure.
He did not get all the votes for that referendum, and the Republicans put it on there, I think, in part because they thought it was going to help him, right?
What probably Republicans don't understand either is that, yes, there are white evangelical Christians, but black voters are evangelical too. And if you look at the black districts in, let's say, Milwaukee, they were overwhelmingly in favor of the marriage amendment.
They were.
I mean, Republicans don't really want to mobilize inner city black voters.
And the death penalty. They were
the same.
Yeah.
In fact, Van Hollen did relatively well in the black district in comparison with Green.
And it was probably those referendum questions that brought him out. Yeah.
Well, still on the subject of the Hentz and Pung-Leschke campaign there, obviously with Hentz winning, this is the first time in 2 decades or thereabouts that a Democrat is going to be representing us here in the 54th Assembly District. Do either of you foresee any major changes? I mean, how do you think Hentz is going to do when he goes to Madison?
You answer that.
Well, actually, I said it before the election. I didn't think it would make a lot of difference because at that time the Democrats had only 39 assembly people and the Republicans 60, and now it's much closer, but it's still 52-47 Republican. And in the assembly, the Republicans will still be cohesive. They see this as the place to stop the Democrats, and so you expect even more partisanship there than ever. Hentz is new. He's not going to be chairman of any committees. He's going to have to earn his way. He's a bright guy. He's young and ambitious, and maybe he'll move quickly. But it's still the minority party. And also, Carol Resler has taken down a peg. Now she's in the minority in the Senate. No longer committee chair. No longer sort of a kingmaker when it comes to Republican politics. So, in some ways, this area has lost a little political clout in Madison.
Will Gordon be sort of as the first-time incumbent in 2 years? I mean, is that when he's most vulnerable?
Most vulnerable in his re-election campaign. You know, if the Republicans can knock him off, that's when they'll attempt to do that. After that, the incumbency advantage tends to set in.
Well, and Julie Leschke has not ruled out another bid for this seat in 2008. You know, I mean, obviously she probably needs to do a few things differently if she's going to run again, but they may be facing each other again in
Well, it is hard to
2
win
years.
any office the first time you run,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't think she should be embarrassed about her performance at all. I mean, a lot of the politicos in town knew who she was, but I think for the city at large, most people did not know Julie Leschke.
Many elected officials are shocked to find out how low their name recognition is when they're, you know, my assemblyman, what's his name? You know, even Greg Underheim might be shocked to find out that he's not a household name in every.
So now that we've got a Democratic governor, a Democratic state senate, and the Democrats are up to 47 in the assembly, which is respectable. Actually, probably 46, because even though Ziegelbauer in Manitowoc calls himself a Democrat, he's pretty much a Republican. isn't he? So yeah. So is this going to make it easier for Jim Doyle to get some kind of agenda through?
It could. You notice that even Dean Colford had a problem.
Yeah.
He did.
And he was talking about the fact that he could talk with both sides. So there are a number of marginal Republicans who may be a little bit more amenable, you know, and less partisan than they might otherwise have been, just if for no other reason to hold on to their seat in the next round.
Well, all three of us are university faculty, and we all would agree that the university has taken a big hit over the last few years. Is this current configuration of the governor and legislature going to be better for us, do you think?
Well, it can't be worse.
Yeah, we have nowhere to go but up.
And actually, you know, to go back to the 54th race, it was kind of refreshing, I thought, that both of the candidates were very big supporters of UW-Oshkosh. And, you know, and in almost identical language said, you know, this is really an important part of the community, and we you know, whoever gets elected has to go down there and support.
Yeah.
Because that's not always been the case.
Right. But do you think it's going to get better for us now with this configuration down there?
You know, that's tough, because I'm not sure that, you know, Doyle's budgets haven't done us any favors.
No,
so I think that, and I'm not sure that we are such a high priority on the Democrats' agenda.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, among our biggest critics, some of them are gone. I mean, Krybeck, for example. Steve Nass is still in office, so we may not be hit with some of the social issues that we kept seeing appear in the papers and on TV. But again, it's going to be a tough budget. I didn't hear the governor say the university was a priority. He said education, but I think he meant kindergarten through 12th grade. And health has to be an issue. That's been growing in importance. We're left with the prison structure that Tommy Thompson built. I think, and this is a fairly moderate to centrist governor. In fact, the Democrats gained, that completely reversed it. It was 28-22 Republican governors before the election, and it's completely reversed. But many of those people were elected are very centrist, and on some social issues, relatively conservative.
Well, Greg Underheim has applied to be a UW lobbyist
Right.
on our behalf.
He didn't get it.
Oh, he didn't get it?
Didn't get it. No.
Okay, so that's how I was going to ask you if you thought he'd be effective at that.
No, because he won't hold the position.
Right. No, I mean, right. If he got it, would you think he would be effective at it? I guess it doesn't matter now. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
He can still lobby for us.
Well, you guys could probably use it. The Attorney General's race, you know, I think that a lot of people thought that Falk had this thing. going her way, and Van Hollen came along, and it was a very, very close race. And as of right now, I don't even think the votes have been certified yet, have they?
No.
Probably by the time this airs, though, they will be. But, any surprises there for either of you?
Actually, I thought she would win as Doyle did, but narrowly. And he won by 8 points and she lost. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me. In this case, the Republicans' analysis could be right. That is that most people see this position as the top cop, and all this talk about prosecuting cases and so on, something that neither of them were actually going to do, as opposed to consumer protection and environmental defense and open records laws and the kinds of things that we expect.
But his ads were effective in making that point.
And at the end, I think where she really tried to attack him for talking tough, but that might have hurt her, because that
Well, I know
seems
that
unfair.
the Republicans were disappointed with the results of the whole night, but that Attorney General's win might turn out to be the biggest coup for them, because the Attorney General's office, I think, is the fastest ticket to the governor. It's high profile. You get to always look tough. You're always taking on some kind of evil, and if you do like Doyle did, which is kind of he took on Tommy a little bit. He made headlines for himself. Van Hollen's in pretty good shape right now, isn't he?
And plus, if he spends his time investigating the governor,
Exactly.
He undercuts the incumbent at the same time he promotes his own candidacy.
Exactly. So, I mean, I know the Democrats are happy at the gains that they made, but I think that Van Hollen win might turn out to be the biggest one.
Yeah.
Actually, another big winner on the 7th was Barbara Lawton, the lieutenant governor. Don't you think now she looks pretty good? I mean, I don't think Doyle's going to run again.
well, truthfully, although many people were unhappy, especially on the campus, about the outcome of the referendum, in many ways, death penalty is now less likely because of the partisan makeup of the state office, and benefits for domestic partners and all the rest of it through legislation is now more likely too, because after all, the governor favored some of those things, and plus the appointment of judges are elected in Wisconsin, but at the federal level, Democrats are less likely to take conservative justices in federal courts. So, even on the propositions, you could see a positive sign for those who were opposed to the marriage amendment or opposed to the death penalty.
So Jim, you actually see domestic partnership benefits perhaps getting a boost
From
as a
the
result of
partisan
this?
makeup of the state. Yeah, I do.
But lawsuits are probably going to be forthcoming, don't you think?
Well, and as I mentioned, the makeup of the courts matters a lot too. So,
Could be an interesting few years. Speaking of courts and the law, Christian Gossett is now going to be taking over in January as the head of our district attorney's office. I don't think any of us at this table were probably too surprised by that victory, were we?
No, but it was in the primary. It was sort of surprising that he won so big. I mean, it was sort of like the 54th district. It was you thought he was going to win, but maybe not quite as by as much.
But Maskey got about 45% of the vote, I think.
well, what was surprising was coroner too. The Democrats did extremely well, and I'm sure that many people showing up for vote that day had no idea that there was a race for coroner.
Yeah. So was it a straight ticket Democrat effect?
I think it was. I mean, I looked at Milwaukee, and straight ticket voting was about 44% of the voting, and I'd like to see what that number is for this county, because it might have been high.
Okay. Was this a case, Jim, of where the national issues were influencing the local races, where in other words, people went in and said, I'm just voting Democrat this year, that they're so outraged about Iraq and Jack Abramoff, corruption and so on, they associate all this with Republicans? Was this just the Democrats at the national level were doing well, so it affected the local races?
Well, this was really a national campaign, from the Senate races to the governor's races down to assembly and coroner races. It was as if the parties were running off pretty much the same game plan. I mean, when I heard Leschke speak, it was almost as if she was reading off a script, of positions she ought to take. The Democrats too. And you would see literature where Gordon was accused of a Hillary-like healthcare proposal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, not even identifying Hillary at all. I guess if you not have a single name, you're
that's right.
prominent.
Yeah, exactly.
But and the nastiness of the campaign. I mean, actually, the campaign between Leschke and Hentz was relatively tame. If you looked at some of the advertising that was going on nationwide. I mean, did you see the Twilight Zone ad or Harold? Give me a call.
Yeah, the
Right.
Yeah.
What about Kagan versus Gard in the 8th Congressional District? Kagan won that. That was
Right.
a very, very nasty campaign.
Absolutely.
Did Steve Kagan, again, like all other Democrats, he benefited from running this year?
Again, when people showed up to polls, I don't know that they knew the candidates' names anymore. They knew the Peshtigo's political Pinocchio and the smart aleck millionaire doctor, but
Well, last time a Democrat was in that seat was Jay Johnson,
yeah.
who he was a TV broadcaster for many years, and he lasted one term in that seat. Do you think Kagan will fare better?
Well, Jay showed up in this campaign too. If you looked at the
Yeah.
ads, he and
Yeah.
another one of the Green
Yeah.
Bay TV personalities showed up calling
To endorse
in a
Kagan.
very in a very humorous way, calling Gard a liar over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
So
mean, do you think Kagan will have more success in that seat?
that's a tough seat for Democrats to hold. I was actually surprised, despite the polls I saw, that Kagan won it. And holding it is really going to be difficult.
Do you think that was the Iraq War? Was that the issue there? The war is right now wildly unpopular, and Gard was on this stay the course
Well-
routine.
Exit polls showed corruption was.
Okay.
I mean, corruption was extremely important. Now, the Republicans seem to be able to take away the strong suit for Kagan with regard to health care because they kept going after him for
Right.
failure to take in Medicaid patients and his arrogance and so
Sure.
on. But if you looked at the primaries, both the Democrats who lost focused on the war almost exclusively. Wall and
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Wall and
Yeah.
Nussbaum.
So Nancy Pelosi's probably actually lucky that Murtha lost to Steny Hoyer for the number 2 slot, because I think the corruption issue,
Abscam was coming back.
yeah, it was going to come back, and if Murtha had come in as the number 2 in the Democratic Congress, then that would have made it a lot harder for the Democrats to say, still vote for us because we're anti-corruption.
But Steny Hoyer, who won, is a border state. You want to say conservative Democrat or New Democrat or Blue Dog Democrat or whatever you want to call it, but clearly that looks like the national election too, because many of the Democrats who won nationwide were marginal districts, moderate Democrats who. It's not clear the Democrats have a mandate, even though they have a majority.
Well, does anybody really think that we're going to see cleanup of corruption at the state level or at the federal level as a result of this election? I mean, most of these guys got elected in the same system that produced the corruption. Now we're supposed to believe that they're going to... Do you expect Wisconsin politics to be cleaned up in the next 2 years because we have a Democratic majority in the Senate?
That's an easy one, no.
No.
And the reason being, even though corruption seems to have been the number one issue in the exit polls, if you look at campaign reform,
Right.
that was like 9th or 10th. And although the public would like to see less corruption, they'd certainly like to see less of those ads that they were bombarded
But the
with.
Republicans got burned by the elections board in this campaign with, Green couldn't use his PAC money from the federal campaign. Will the fact that one of their guys got burned, will that now push them to support reform of at least the elections board? There's the bill that would unite the elections and ethics board. Mike McCabe, the Democracy Campaign, put out a press release saying we now have over 60% of the members of this legislature who are on record as supporting that reform. So, do you think that they'll pass this in the first week?
Look, I don't think that goes terribly far. And frankly, every time there is a reform that's supposed to clean up politics, the various groups find a way around it. And
Yeah.
oftentimes the situation is worse than before the reform.
And a lot of the reforms are incumbent protection anyway.
I think the one positive sign is the fact that this kind of Rovian strategy of using wedge issues and having close races
Yeah.
and mobilizing your base through television advertising didn't work. And the television advertising, of course, is what is so expensive. That's what you need to raise the money for. And so if that's in the mix of things isn't working quite as well, then maybe the congressmen and senators don't have to spend their time dialing for dollars.
As a journalist, Miles, what did you make of that report that came out that said that the local newscasts were spending on average 36 seconds a night on election coverage? More than half was advertising, weather, and sports.
There is no question that corporate media in America has fled from covering the news. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising.
What can be done about that other than the population at large seeking alternatives?
I think that's that's all that's going to happen, because I don't see any corporate news organization that's going to say, oh, let's hire a bunch of good reporters and put them on the street and change our evil ways.
Is there reasoning that election coverage just isn't a popular item, that the public wants weather and sports?
Right, and I think that newspapers, there's this fine line that you walk where you're there to serve the readers, right? And if the readers are interested in sports and weather and fashion and celebrity gossip, shouldn't you serve them? On the other hand, journalism, newspapers, news broadcasting, it's the only industry in America that's protected by the Constitution.
Yeah.
So it does have a special role, and if it doesn't continue to play that role, I think that there is a danger lurking out there, and it's already starting to happen. You can already see that court decisions are moving against free speech, against freedom of the press, because I think the press has lost some of its stature and credibility in the eyes of the general
Can I ask
public.
one more question to this, Cheryl?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
My understanding is to get an FCC license, you have to operate in the public interest. How can only 36 seconds of election coverage during a campaign season constitute acting in the public interest? Why don't we start a movement, I don't mean us, but people in general, to have their licenses revoked?
Because I don't think the mechanism exists anymore. Because during the Reagan years, it used to be that you could go to a radio station or a TV station and say, "Let me see your logs and let me see the evidence that you are working in the public interest."
You can't do that now.
Well, you can, but they don't have to keep the records.
Oh, gee.
Plus, there's so many other things that constitute public interest. Whether it's telethons or other types of benefits and that kind
The
of thing.
Packers, there's a lot of public interest for the Packers,
Well, in many ways, the actual coverage that exists was like sports coverage. Who's winning,
No
who's
horse
losing, is Brett Favre retiring, or who's decided not to run for re-election, And the interesting thing too is that policymaking was almost taken out of the political partisan arena, because much of the real action in this last election was the various ballot initiatives across the country.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot happened of substance where it could. And in some cases, politicians avoided conflict by putting the referendums on the ballot and saying, let the voters decide, because we can't or won't. I mean, and if you look at all the ballot initiatives that were there, I mean, look at the Milwaukee voted Iraq war referendum, and there were a number of other cities in Wisconsin and across the country that did the same. There was the minimum wage initiatives that won overwhelmingly. There was eminent domain. I mean, the concern of people that a city can simply take your property, not for any public good, but to give it for some development that will bring in more money, those won overwhelmingly. So animal rights. I mean, there were a whole set of things that weren't being covered at all that people were putting in place through their own ballot efforts, or at least advising elected officials what they wanted them to do. And on the other hand, marriage amendment, death penalty, guns, affirmative action in Michigan, takings legislation, where if you think regulation is taking value of your property away, there were various propositions that said, well, now they have to pay you for the use of your land. So a lot was going on that really wasn't covered at all, and it was popular initiatives that were doing it.
Yeah, a number of those that you just mentioned, Jim, I hadn't heard about. You had mentioned the abortion one that was in one of the states out west, I believe.
On the Dakotas, North Dakota or South?
Yeah. And some of those I knew about, but I didn't know about the animal rights, and I didn't know about the eminent domain, So
Well, there was casino gambling. I mean,
Yeah.
you can go down the list of things that people cared
Jim,
about.
what we saw in this election, explain how this has happened. Lots of people in Michigan, for example, were voting to get rid of affirmative action, but then they were voting for Democrats.
Right.
In Wisconsin, people were voting for this marriage amendment, then they're voting for Democrats.
And voting out the Republicans who were most active in putting the propositions on the ballot.
All right, so now explain that. What has happened? Has this been a strategy of the Democratic Party to distance themselves now from affirmative action, gay marriage? How was it possible that all of these so-called conservative initiatives were passing at the same time people were electing Democrats to office?
Well, some of them were liberal initiatives too. I mean, the minimum wage.
Right.
I mean, the eminent domain, and
Right,
animal
but
rights. You could.
Right, but in Michigan, the affirmative action was the thing on the ballot.
Absolutely.
In Wisconsin, the marriage amendment was the thing. Both states went Democrat, but they also overwhelmingly went for these initiatives. How's that happen?
The point is that the party platforms, neither one, completely align with public opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just simply not the case that the party stances are congruent with opinion on a whole range of issues. And so, there's some issues that Republicans don't want to touch, and the Democrats the same. And take issue of abortion. I mean, in one sense, you could say a majority of Americans favor abortion, but the fact is we're almost evenly divided. Half of us would only allow abortion for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. There are very few people say no, never, under no circumstance. And on the other side, there are very few would say, it's a woman's choice for whatever reason. So, I mean,
Yet in South Dakota, they had an initiative on the ballot which would have banned all abortions, correct? This was designed to challenge Roe versus Wade.
No. It went the other way. Which the
Yeah,
initiative went against the state law.
I
which-
know,
yeah.
I know. But what I'm saying is the voters in South Dakota is a conservative state.
Right,
But the voters voted to protect abortion rights.
right. But the law outlawed abortion under any circumstance. So
circumstances.
the point was that law had gone too far, and the voters were saying, our position is more nuanced,
Right.
more complex than you're saying. What you've got is an extremist point of view that the legislature passed and the governor accepted, and we don't want to go that far.
But it is only a matter of time, just to stay on abortion for a second,
Sure.
it is only a matter of time, I'm sure you would agree, that Roe versus Wade gets to this current Supreme Court.
That's right.
What do you think this current Supreme Court would do with Roe versus Wade? I believe they'd overturn it.
The court has been seeming to move in that direction, restricting abortion more and more to the point where for some women it's very difficult to do.
Because Alito is solidly in the conservative camp. Everyone thought, or many people thought, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, was going to be this moderate influence on the court, but he's turned out to be pretty much in the Scalia mold, hasn't he? To this point?
Well, here again, does the president get another appointment to the Supreme Court in the next 2 years? And if so, it's unlikely the Democrats, as contentious as they are going to let the president have someone who is pro-life.
But what are the implications? I mean, if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, you're looking at a permanent Democrat majority. Because, as Jim was saying, I think that's not the way most Americans feel.
No,
and if they say Republicans packed this court and took away this right that we're not really comfortable with, but we're sort of okay with this fuzzy area, they're going to blame that on the Republicans.
All right.
Yeah, they're like Clinton. They want abortion to be available but uncommon.
Yeah,
Right.
And I think Roberts is shrewd enough. The court follows the polls. I think that he knows what's going on.
Judges are influenced by public opinion?
we had talked about some of the referendum questions, and there were 10 communities that had referendums Tuesday in Wisconsin to bring the troops home. And all 10 of them voted to bring the troops home, and that comes 6 months after 24 of 32 communities had also said the same thing. I mean, they're symbolic referendums. What do you see happening? I mean, do you see this as sending, obviously it sends a message, but do you see it having any real effect?
I don't see, honestly, how you can bring the troops home very quickly without everything just collapsing. and being, if it's possible to imagine, worse than it is now. So I think there's got to be some kind of phased, structured approach, but I don't know what that is, and I'm pretty sure Jim Baker doesn't know what it is, and I'm damn sure George Bush doesn't know what it is.
But I will tell you that if there's any bipartisanship, I think both congressional parties would like to see a withdrawal that, if it's not done by 2008, is well along the way.
Well, I think all those referendum questions around the country on this have created an environment where there is developing a bipartisan consensus to at least have some withdrawal date.
Right.
And I think it's been that activism that's done that.
Right. But did you see the cover of the current issue of the New Yorker? It's the Pottery Barn joke. It's it's George Bush is standing in this Pottery Barn gallery, and there's broken shards of ceramics everywhere, and it's we broke it. We own it. So what do we do about it? I mean, it's a misbegotten war. I don't think there's any question of that. But it is possible to make things worse.
Well, Miles, none of us at this table is a military expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I remember an article that I wrote just about at the time that the war was starting. And I interviewed someone from the university, and he told me that military occupation over there would probably be about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you both kind of share that view, or do you think that's too long? I mean, we've been there 3 years already.
Well, I think one of the things that is based on is a study of insurgencies, and insurgencies run about 10 years. So, if we're going to try to outlive the insurgency, we're going to stay there that long. The problem is that it is such unlike Vietnam with the domino metaphor that was used there, it really does look like there may be a domino effect in Iraq with Iran and Syria. And a lot of there's so many interrelated things that are happening. Lebanon, and now there are 4 or 5 Arab countries that are now saying that they need to start nuclear programs because they need to protect themselves in case Israel goes against Iran. I mean, the strategies and policies of this administration have they've taken an incredibly messy situation and just messed it up even more. Right. And unfortunately, I don't know that there's a clean, simple solution.
Not to mention the radicalization of many young Muslims who are our own citizens, both in Europe and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the real question for the Bush administration is, are they going to invade Iran? Can you see that happening at this point? There's a lot of saber rattling over the nuclear program. Has Iraq been such a disaster that they can't make that move?
I think we're overextended. I can't imagine. I could see.
Well, they can go in from the air.
Sure. Well, but see, the Lebanon situation, I think, proves that doesn't work. I think that if Israel had been successful in driving Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon by air, then I think we'd be bombing Iran today. But when that didn't work, you had to go back and say, if we bomb Iran and we don't accomplish our goal, then we're in a lot worse situation.
Well, but if you're George W. Bush and you've got 2 years left in your presidency, you've got lower approval ratings than Nixon, it seems like, in the Watergate period. I mean, it's sad, it's tragic, but historically, Jim, isn't it true that presidents have upped their approval ratings by bombing something?
Well, C. Wright Mills used to talk about crackpot realism, that some conservatives, we might call neoliberals now, simplify conflicts by going to war because it's a much simpler solution than negotiation or diplomacy or other tactics. So, but I still think this is unlikely with Iran. I just can't believe the Bush administration in the last 2 years is going to do that.
And you have to remember that one of Iran's allies is Russia.
Yeah.
And so you cannot go in there and bomb them and think that you can then walk away. I mean, pretty much Iraq was
but a growing
on its own.
but a growing number of people in America want to see the troops come home soon.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it looks like the front runners for president on both sides for 2008 are hawks. Hillary's been a hawk. John McCain wants more troops in Iraq. Can you see a scenario, Jim, where someone comes into the Democratic primaries who is able to overtake Hillary just by having a peace platform?
That's actually a little bit more likely with the way the Democrats have restructured the primaries. So you've got it's not just New Hampshire and Iowa that's coming up. You've got 2 others, and so
Nevada?
yeah,
Yeah.
I've forgotten just exactly what they did, but it looks like the Democrats are never happy with the way the primary season works and the candidates they get because they keep losing, so they're always tinkering with them.
Sure.
And so then you can never predict what's going to come out of them.
Well, there's been a lot of talk, and everyone has this discussion now about Barack Obama of Illinois. Very charismatic, first term as a senator, but he seems to have a lot of positions that Americans would like. Would you anticipate him getting in there? Now that Feingold has withdrawn himself,
He's just a
especially.
first-term senator. I mean, he's very charismatic, and he's been doing a lot of things in the election which are positive for him in the long run. The blue dog, the new Democrats now see this election as, and particularly with the election of one of their own for the majority leader now for the Senate, they're going to be pushing their own people too. I don't know if they can catch fire in these early primaries and
But are we
caucuses.
living in a time now, Jim, where it's not possible for a Jimmy Carter-like figure? I mean, nobody knew Jimmy Carter in 1976. He comes out of nowhere, and he gets the Democratic Party.
Howard
nomination.
Dean was the front runner at some point. Was leading in money. He came from nowhere. He self-destructed, but under a little better guidance and management, he might well have come out of nowhere.
But someone like Tom Vilsack of Iowa, could he be like a Jimmy Carter of 2008? Yeah.
He's
Nice
sort
guy, Iowa governor, competent,
of bland.
bland. Yeah. Maybe after Bush, maybe we want someone bland after Bush.
Well, then the new Democrats come into play.
Okay.
You've got Evan Bayh of Indiana and a number of other uninspiring choices.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Green Party for a few minutes. Ray Vogler ran against Herb Kohl for the Senate seat, and I don't think anyone really expected her to win, but she did better than most of the other Green Party candidates did in the races that they ran. And yet we hear so much talk by different people in the community about how, Greens and independents are taking votes away from one side or another. We heard that in your campaign that you ran last year. And I still get mail to this day from some people who blame Tony for running as a Green or other Green Party candidates for screwing up elections. Do you see that as screwing up elections because you're running on a platform that you believe in?
I don't. I think that it's not like the parties, as Jim was saying, neither of the big established parties have platforms or positions that really align with the American people.
Well, the Greens clearly have a constituency. I did a study a couple years ago looking at the Nader vote and looking at what I would call post-materialist values that the Greens clearly stand for. And maybe 1 voter in 8 should be a Green voter. I mean, strong Green voter. But the interesting thing is, in this election, not only did Eisman and Vogler not get into the debates, but they didn't even have the Democrats attacking them. This looked like it was going to be a close race for governor, and you didn't have Doyle vilifying Eisman as it's taking away his votes. They just simply ignored the Greens. I mean, after 2000, and with sort of the destruction of Nader and the failure of the Greens in 2004, the Democrats have not been focusing on the Greens at all. And Vogler's vote total is misleading because, once again, I think many Republicans showed up on Election Day and had no idea there was a Republican running against Herb Kohl.
Right.
I mean, Lorge, I mean, in fact, I heard more about Vogler than I did Lorge. I think I saw a couple signs on the way to Madison.
highway,
Yeah.
Well, I think you're going to see third parties get even more active in the next couple of years when it becomes clear that these so-called blue dog Democrats are what are really calling the shots now. These are moderate to conservative Democrats. An increasing number of people are going to keep saying, you know what, there's not enough of a difference between these two establishment parties. And I think that's going to lead to more third-party activism.
Well, 1980, Jimmy Carter's re-election with Ronald Reagan did produce a major third-party candidate,
John Anderson.
John Anderson, and you had Barry Commoner, who was the first Green, actually, the Citizens Party, and he might have caught fire if it hadn't been for Anderson entering the race. So who knows?
Right.
What does it take to get an independent or a Green Party candidate invited to the debates? I mean, because you're right, they're not invited, and how can, but for shows like this and your radio show, how can they get their message out in the same fair manner that the other candidates do?
Well, this is a good question, since I've been attempting to do this for years. I'm not sure I have an answer. First, you have to show that there's support. I mean, John Anderson gained attention, was invited to the debates because he could demonstrate the public opinion polls indicated he had support. But then he began within the major parties and split with them, so he was a bolter. In another case, you had Ross Perot. At one point, before he self-destructed, he was leading in the polls. I mean, running ahead of Clinton and Bush. I mean, so it's entirely possible that you can have a maverick who just simply has name recognition and the right climate. The public is ready for something like that, but you're not going to get in the debates unless you've already demonstrated that you have support and that they need to invite you.
Well, at the national level, for like president, if you're on the ballot in enough states that you could theoretically win the presidency with enough electoral votes, shouldn't that be enough to get you in the debates? Because as you know, to get on the ballot in most states, that means you have support. It's a Herculean effort to get on the ballot. It's easy in Wisconsin, but it is in other states, it's almost impossible, isn't it?
Well, the Libertarians have been making that argument since 1972. They're nearly always on the ballot in every state, and they always have a lot of candidates, and they get less attention than the Greens do.
I know. But wouldn't you agree that if you did all that work to get on the ballot in most states to the point where you could theoretically win the presidency, shouldn't that be enough to get you in the debates?
Corporate media or corporations generally understand market share. And if you've got market share, then you're invited to the table. If you don't, you're just sort of a novelty item.
Right.
But it's kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg, because you're saying got to show that there's some support out there for you in order to get invited to the debates. Well, everyone's not a Ross Perot. In order to get some support, you've got to get your message out there, and if no one's willing to invite you to a debate, how are you going to have the same opportunity for getting your message to the people that the Dems and the Republicans have?
Well, short of being a billionaire like Ross Perot or someone who bolts from the major parties and already has name recognition, it's very difficult. And a party that comes from the grassroots and builds from nonpartisan elections, winning locally, that's never happened.
Okay. Want to move to some local issues? The garbage fee. We won't have one in 2007. Overwhelmingly, 80% to 20%.
Yeah.
But voters also don't want to give the council the power to exceed the levy. That failed by almost the same percentage. What's your take on those?
I think it's interesting that obviously Oshkosh has a reputation, well deserved, for being sort of tight with a buck, and so I think there's definitely a monetary aspect to this. But I think it was also a vote against City Hall. It was a vote against the council. I think it was a vote against things like the fishing pier and the Leach Auditorium, things that the council either approved or pushed through that really weren't what the city wanted. And so I think people were saying, A, I don't want to pay this, but B, I don't really believe that you guys are necessarily acting in my best interest, and if you're going to have some trouble balancing the budget, tough. That's your problem. And I think the situation would be different if the council and the City Hall spent more time trying to develop broad-based support for some of these things. I mean, I think the Leach is a perfect example where you go and look at it, and it's lovely, it's beautiful, it's a wonderful addition to the city. You go there, you enjoy the concerts, but the way that it happened still leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Do you share that perception, Jim, that this was a vote against the council and against City Hall?
Yeah, I've rarely seen so much dissatisfaction with city and city government, and it's across the board. I mean, you find, this is a a low-income city, it's a blue-collar city, and taxes have been traditionally very low, and people unwilling to pay for them, particularly for services that they don't use. And so that's a constant. But when you find people in the Chamber of Commerce or Progress Oshkosh just as unhappy with the city as everyone else, and the issue that comes up, as it does with the National Administration of Competence, you know, I mean, people just don't have a lot of confidence in city officials that they're capable of doing anything as complicated as a budget or deciding what is needed or where cuts can be made.
Well, we've now had 2 open meetings opinions from Madison go against the city.
Right.
And in both cases, they're kind of brushed aside as, oh, well, that's just their opinion down in Madison. How does the public, do you think, I get the feeling the public are outraged at the kind of brazen attitude in the city towards these things. What's your view?
Well, there's a certain level of discontent. I don't know that it rises to the level of outrage, however. I mean, that's, you know, I think the people in City Hall kind of look out and say, what can I do here without getting my chain yanked back? And you know, so far so good. I mean, you know, yeah, the decisions come down, and it should be embarrassing, but I'm not sure that it is.
No.
And I don't see you know, council members banging the table and saying, you know, we've got to do something about this. In fact, you've got a system that makes it very difficult for the council to exercise any real oversight. The only person that they're supposed to look at is the city manager, and then only indirectly through the city manager to the department heads. But you know, and we have, I think, a very powerful city manager who has a lot of control. So if they did exercise thorough oversight, they could have greater control. But still, there is that kind of two-step process.
Frankly, I don't think the city manager is all that strong. I think that basically the department heads run the city as a council, and that the city manager is a spokesman for them. I mean, he's, you know, a good spokesman for them, but the fact is that if you expect to be able to criticize a department head, whether it's a city attorney for your complaint or the city clerk for, you know, the registration drive in the campus, like one of my colleagues was complaining about, or anyone else, and you expect to go to the city manager and get some redress for your grievances, you're probably not going to get it.
Can you see a scenario where the city manager is removed? That doesn't happen usually, right? Unless there's a major, like, sex scandal or something.
You know, Dick Wallenk, despite the fact that he really lacked the credentials to be a city manager when he was elected, has served longer than any other city manager in Oshkosh except Bill Free.
But can you see a scenario where there's 4 votes to remove him? What would have to happen for that vote to be for that vote to even come up? What would have to happen?
Well, there would have to be a changeover of at least two councilmen in April.
Right, but is it common for a council in this form of government to remove a manager because citizens are unhappy with garbage fees, or there just seems to be a general competence issue? Doesn't there have to be like a corruption issue?
But I think that one of the things that Wallenk is very good at is, and you'll hear him say this again and again during council meetings, whatever the council wants us to do, we will go do that. So we're here to serve you. So he's very good at pushing it back to the council and say, well, but you know, 2 months ago you voted and told us to do these things, so we went and did them. You want us to do something else? You, council, tell us and we'll do it. So I can't imagine a scenario short of a sex scandal or something like that where
Well, city managers are like university chancellors. They average about 5 or 6 years before they move on, either for personal ambition or because they run afoul of the public over a major issue. Now, Dick has been relatively successful not only in avoiding scandal. He's one of the early city managers in the city had scandals, particularly sex scandals, and none of that with him. And he is very successful in making it appear that the council is responsible for all the action, and there really aren't any alternatives. And the council, frankly, in this form of government, isn't really well positioned to think about what other things might be done without the assistance of city staff.
But do you think it's time, either one of you, that the city council say, you know what, Mr. City Manager, you better start to rein in some of your department heads, and here are the reasons why. I mean, there have been a ton of problems with things coming out of the city attorney's office, for example, and yet all of that just seems to be, I don't want to say overlooked, but not given the importance that it should.
Well, this form of government is very much like the corporate model, where you have an appointed CEO and you have a board of directors. They serve part-time, they're very little pay. You know, they look at the materials like the Friday before the Tuesday when they're going to be making decisions, much like the faculty senate.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you know, fairly ineffectual, you know, on most issues, unless the public comes and really complains about something like a garbage fee.
And highly dependent on staff.
And highly dependent upon staff.
Miles, are you surprised we're not seeing more elected officials blogging? A few of them are doing it. Brian Bain does it.
Brian Bain does it well.
Jeff
yeah.
Hall does it very well.
Mike
Right.
Norton does it some.
Mike
yeah.
Norton's
Mike
doing
Norton
some.
does it some.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are you surprised we're not seeing more?
No, because I think one of the the beauties of the blog is that it's there and it's permanent, and I think that a lot of people, a lot of politicians don't want to commit themselves to a position. They don't want to commit themselves to writing, and they certainly don't want to commit something that lasts forever on the internet.
And
I
they
think
don't want
it's
to open
unfortunate.
themselves up to criticism. I mean, they don't want a blog where people actually come on and they say things, and some of the things are really negative, and some of the things are nasty, and then you have to act as the administrator of the
Yeah.
blog and take them out and offend some people.
Yeah, I think Brian Bain sets a great example, though. I mean, I think he shows that you can do it. You can do it in sort of a neutral information sharing kind of way. I wish more people did.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Quickly, county board. As we speak, the board itself has tried to short circuit this movement to get it down to 19th through a referendum. Do you think ultimately the voters here in county will vote on whether or not to reduce that board size?
I don't think so. I think that what the county board, if you wanted a large board, what they did, I think, was relatively effective. I mean, I don't think the lawsuits will ultimately be successful. I mean, it will undercut members of the county board and the county board itself with the public generally, so you could see some losses of some people who, but I don't see a referendum.
Miles, what about you?
Yeah, I don't see that there's a great groundswell of concern about the size of the county board. I mean, there are specific groups that are upset about it.
5,000 signatures is a
That's
lot of
substantial.
signatures to collect in this.
Yeah, but I don't. There's not the energy or the This isn't something that people are really going to. I mean, it's easy to sign a petition. Somebody says, "Here, sign this."
Yeah, but getting people to go out and collect a petition, that's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but very quickly, Dan Becker announced today he intends to run for school board again. Smart move, Jim?
I don't know.
I think
Fiscal conservative, except when it comes to recounts.
right. I think he's going to get burned pretty bad.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's going to do it. Thank you both very much for being here. We appreciate it. Tony, thank you. And always, thanks to you for letting us in your home for the last hour. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.
Oshkosh.